Nestled within a picturesque landscape of manicured lawns and white picket fences, my neighborhood seemed like the perfect place to call home. The streets were lined with blooming flowers, and children could often be seen playing in the yards while friendly faces waved from porches. It was a kind of community where newcomers were welcomed with open arms and a plate of freshly baked cookies. At least, that's how I imagined it when I first moved in. As I settled into my charming little house, I quickly learned that my idyllic vision had its shadows. The residents took great pride in their properties, adhering to the unwritten rules of decorum that dictated everything from lawn care to holiday decorations. Most people embraced this sense of order, but lurking within the ranks of our seemingly tight-knit community was a woman whose presence loomed larger than life. Our neighborhood self-appointed enforcer, often referred to as HOA Karen. Karen was not just any homeowner. She was the president of our homeowners association. With her meticulously groomed hair and an ever-present clipboard, she patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk, ready to swoop down on anyone who dared stray from her version of perfection. Though many residents respected her for her dedication to maintaining property values, others viewed her with a mix of fear and irritation. I found myself somewhere in between, initially hoping to stay under her radar. However, it wasn't long before my hopes were dashed. My first encounter with Karen happened on a sunny Saturday morning while I was tending to my garden. As I admired the vibrant colors of my petunias and marigolds, I noticed her approaching with purpose. A sense of unease washed over me as she began to scrutinize my flower beds with a critical eye. It was then that I realized the delicate balance of this neighborhood, a place where charm and camaraderie coexisted alongside an unyielding adherence to rules enforced by those like Karen. What started as a friendly wave quickly spiraled into something much more complicated. Little did I know that this would be the beginning of a confrontation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about community living. As Karen approached, clipboard in hand and a stern expression etched across her face, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. She was well known in the neighborhood, and while I had heard whispers of her reputation, nothing could prepare me for the full force of her presence. Standing there, with my gardening gloves still on and dirt smudged across my cheek, I quickly realized I was about to enter a world governed by her strict rules. "Good morning," I offered, trying to sound cheerful despite my mounting anxiety. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she launched straight into her agenda. "I hope you're aware that flower beds must adhere to HOA guidelines," she declared, her voice clipped and authoritative. My heart raced as I processed her words. Guidelines? What guidelines? I had assumed that my choice of colorful flowers would be welcomed in our vibrant community. As she pointed out some of my blooms, "These marigolds are too tall, and those petunias are not the approved color," I felt a mix of disbelief and embarrassment wash over me. It seemed absurd that someone could dictate the height and hue of my plants. I attempted to explain that I had simply chosen flowers I loved, but Karen was unmoved. Her tone softened only slightly when she noted that others had received warnings for similar offenses. In that moment, it became clear this was not just about gardening. It was about power dynamics within the neighborhood. Karen's authority felt absolute, and I was a newcomer who unwittingly stepped into the lion's den. As she continued listing her grievances, I could see that she relished this role as a guardian of our community standards. It was unsettling to witness how easily she wielded her influence over residents' lives. The encounter left me reeling. While I had hoped to cultivate friendships and enjoy leisurely evenings on my porch, I now found myself grappling with the reality that I'd entered a battleground where petty disputes could escalate into serious threats. The term HOA Karen suddenly took on new meaning for me, a representation of not just one woman's overreach, but a symbol of an entire system where compliance was demanded at any cost. Little did I know then that our clash would set off a chain reaction that would change my life in the neighborhood forever. The infraction that set the stage for my ongoing battle with HOA Karen was surprisingly trivial, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 grievances. It all started when I decided to embrace a little creativity in my yard. Inspired by a recent visit to a local festival, I had the bright idea to display some whimsical garden gnomes among my flowers. They were cheerful little figures, each with their own quirky personality. One held a fishing pole, another wore oversized sunglasses, and one even sported a tiny sombrero. I thought they added charm and a touch of fun to my otherwise traditional garden. However, what I saw as artistic expression was destined to be seen through Karen's critical lens. After observing the gnomes for just a few days, I received an official letter from the HOA board, all thanks to her vigilant watch. The letter was worded delicately, but its message was clear. My gnome display violated neighborhood decorum and had to be removed immediately. The reason given? Inconsistent with community aesthetics. Reading those words felt surreal. I could hardly believe that something as innocent as garden decorations could provoke such ire. I pictured Karen sitting at her kitchen table, pen in hand, drafting that letter with an air of triumph as if she had just achieved some monumental victory for our neighborhood. My heart sank as I realized that my playful attempt at personal expression had unwittingly crossed an invisible line. Determined not to back down without a fight, I took it upon myself to research the HOA guidelines thoroughly. As I combed through the documents, I discovered vague references to appropriate decor, but no specific mention of garden gnomes or any similar ornaments. Armed with this knowledge, I prepared for the inevitable confrontation that would follow. When I faced Karen again, this time armed with my newfound insights, she seemed taken aback by my confidence. But rather than engage in a rational discussion, she doubled down on her stance, insisting that maintaining property values meant adhering strictly to her version of beauty. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about the gnomes. It was about standing up against an overreaching authority that sought to stifle individuality in favor of conformity. Little did she know that this playful infraction would ignite my determination to reclaim my space in the neighborhood and challenge her reign over our community. The day of the confrontation arrived with a mix of anticipation and dread. Armed with my research and a newfound resolve, I knew it was time to face HOA Karen head-on. I had decided to host a small gathering in my backyard, inviting neighbors over for an afternoon barbecue. It was a chance to foster connections and, hopefully, gain some allies in this escalating conflict. But I was also bracing myself for her inevitable appearance. As laughter and the smell of grilled burgers filled the air, I spotted Karen striding down the path toward my home, her familiar clipboard in hand. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Conversations quieted, and all eyes turned to witness what would unfold. My heart raced as she approached, a look of disapproval plastered across her face. "Nice gathering," she began, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But I hope you're aware that you're still in violation of HOA rules." She gestured sharply toward my beloved gnomes, which stood proudly among the flowers. "These decorations have no place in our neighborhood." I felt my cheeks flush, but took a deep breath to steady myself. "Actually, Karen, I've reviewed the HOA guidelines, and there's no mention of garden gnomes being prohibited," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "They're just a bit of whimsy in an otherwise traditional garden." Karen's eyes narrowed as she leaned closer, her clipboard poised like a weapon. "Whimsy? You think this is about whimsy? This is about maintaining standards. If we let one person disregard the rules, it opens the floodgates for others. Do you want to turn our community into a circus?" As she spoke, I noticed some of my neighbors subtly shifting closer, intrigued by our exchange. Fueled by their presence and my growing conviction, I pressed on. "Isn't part of what makes our neighborhood special its diversity? We live here because we love our homes and each other's uniqueness, not just to fit into some cookie-cutter mold." For a moment, there was silence as the weight of my words hung in the air. Karen seemed taken aback by my defiance. Perhaps she wasn't used to residents pushing back against her authority. Sensing a shift in the crowd's energy, several neighbors murmured in agreement. But Karen wasn't ready to concede defeat. "You'll regret this," she warned ominously before turning on her heel and storming away, clipboard clutched tightly in hand. As she left, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. This confrontation had only intensified the battle lines drawn between us. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of an ongoing struggle for control over our community, and my sense of belonging within it. In the aftermath of my confrontation with HOA Karen, the reactions from my neighbors were a mixed bag. As the barbecue continued, I could feel the tension in the air. Some guests were clearly supportive, while others exchanged wary glances, unsure of how to navigate the brewing conflict. It became evident that my stand against Karen had sparked a range of opinions within our community. A few neighbors gathered around me shortly after she left, their expressions one of concern and curiosity. "I can't believe you stood up to her like that," said Mark, a friendly guy from 2 houses down. "We've all wanted to say something, but didn't know how." His words brought me a flicker of encouragement. Perhaps I wasn't alone in feeling stifled by Karen's overreach. Then there was Linda, an older woman known for her beautiful rose garden and gentle demeanor. She approached cautiously, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid Karen might return at any moment. "I admire your courage," she said quietly, "but you should be careful. Karen has a lot of influence in this neighborhood." Her warning hung in the air like a dark cloud, highlighting the palpable fear that many felt toward Karen's authority. As the afternoon wore on, conversations shifted from light-hearted banter to discussions about neighborhood governance. People began sharing their own experiences with Karen, recounting tales of unsolicited warnings and petty grievances that had been meted out over the years. It was as if I had unwittingly opened a floodgate of pent-up frustration. Some residents expressed their desire for change, fueled by my defiance. "We shouldn't have to live in fear of being reported for trivial things," one neighbor remarked passionately. Others, however, were more cautious. "I think we should just keep our heads down and avoid trouble," another chimed in, echoing Linda's earlier sentiment. By the end of the day, I realized that my stand had ignited a spark among some residents, while simultaneously deepening divisions among others. The barbecue had transformed into something more significant, a forum for discussion about community values and shared experiences under the looming shadow of HOA Karen. As everyone began to disperse, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. While I had found allies willing to support my cause, I also recognized that taking on Karen would not be easy. The community was divided. Some saw her as an oppressive force, while others remained loyal to her vision of order and conformity. It was clear that my fight was far from over, and the road ahead promised to be tumultuous as I navigated these fractured relationships within our neighborhood. As the days turned into weeks following my confrontation with HOA Karen, the conflict escalated in ways I could never have anticipated. Initially, I felt a sense of empowerment from standing up to her, but that pride soon turned into unease as Karen retaliated in increasingly aggressive ways. It became clear that I had awakened a dormant beast within her, one that was not going to retreat easily. The first sign of escalation arrived in the form of a formal complaint lodged against me by the HOA board. The letter arrived on my doorstep one rainy afternoon, detailing a series of alleged violations that went beyond the gnomes. Karen claimed I had failed to maintain my lawn properly and had also disregarded the community's regulations regarding outdoor lighting. I was stunned. I had always kept my yard tidy and had even added some tasteful string lights for evening gatherings. It felt as if she was grasping at straws, trying to find any reason to exert control over me. Feeling cornered, I decided it was time to gather evidence in my defense. I began documenting everything, taking photos of my yard, noting the dates of neighborhood events where my decorations had been admired rather than criticized, and even reaching out to neighbors who were willing to speak on my behalf. Many were ready to share their own frustrations about Karen's heavy-handed tactics, and it felt reassuring to know I wasn't alone in this fight. However, Karen didn't back down. She ramped up her efforts by organizing an emergency HOA meeting focused solely on my situation. The agenda clearly indicated that she wanted to make an example of me, presenting me as a threat to the neighborhood's integrity. This only fueled my determination. If she thought she could intimidate me into submission, she was sorely mistaken. At the meeting, tensions ran high. Supporters rallied around me, while others remained loyal to Karen's vision of order and compliance. As she presented her case against me with exaggerated fervor, it became evident she was not just defending rules, but also her personal power within the community. Amidst the heated discussions and accusations, I finally found my voice again. Armed with my documentation and support from neighbors who spoke up on my behalf, I countered her claims one by one. The air crackled with uncertainty as people began to question whether her strict interpretations of the rules truly reflected the spirit of our community. What began as a simple disagreement over garden gnomes had morphed into a full-blown battle for control of our neighborhood's identity. As the meeting adjourned, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. This fight was far from over, and I knew that standing firm would require not just courage, but also unwavering support from those who believed in preserving our community's diversity amid Karen's rigid ideals. The day of the community meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Neighbors filed into the local community center, their expressions a blend of curiosity and apprehension. This meeting was not just about me. It had become a defining moment for our neighborhood. Will we stand behind the rigid rules enforced by HOA Karen, or will we embrace a more inclusive vision of community living? As I entered the room, I felt the weight of everyone's gaze upon me. It became clear that my battle against Karen had transformed into a larger discussion about the direction of our neighborhood. The air buzzed with whispers as residents took their seats, and I could sense a division among us. Some eager to support change, while others appeared ready to defend the status quo. Karen opened the meeting with her usual authoritative tone, outlining the agenda focused on my alleged violations. She presented her case with fervor, pulling out charts and photographs that showcased my supposed infractions. "This is not just about one person's garden gnomes," she declared. "It's about maintaining property values and ensuring that our neighborhood remains a place we can all be proud of." I listened as she painted my actions in a negative light, trying to frame me as an outsider threatening our community's integrity. But as she spoke, I noticed murmurs of dissent growing among some of my neighbors. A few brave souls expressed their frustration with her heavy-handed tactics, recounting their own experiences of feeling stifled by her overreach. When it was finally my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. Armed with my documentation and backed by supportive nods from friends in the audience, I laid out my defense. I spoke passionately about my love for our neighborhood and how creativity and individuality could enhance its charm rather than detract from it. We don't need to be afraid of expressing ourselves, I urged. Diversity is what makes this community vibrant. As I spoke, I could feel the energy shift in the room. Many neighbors began to nod in agreement, echoing sentiments that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. The once dominant narrative began to fracture, revealing cracks in Karen's facade of control. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that something significant had shifted within our community. While Karen remained steadfast in her beliefs, several residents voiced their desire for a reevaluation of our HOA rules, one that would foster inclusivity rather than conformity. Though I knew this battle was far from over, I left the meeting feeling hopeful. Together, we had begun to challenge a long-standing status quo and pave the way for a neighborhood where everyone could feel at home, not just those who fit neatly within Karen's narrow vision. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon and casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded over the past few months. What started as a simple infraction involving garden gnomes had spiraled into a full-fledged conflict, revealing deeper issues within our community. I felt both exhausted and invigorated by the journey I had undertaken. This experience forced me to confront not just my relationship with HOA Karen, but also my own beliefs about community and individuality. Initially, I had hoped to live peacefully among my neighbors, blending in and avoiding any drama. But now, it was clear that maintaining harmony sometimes required standing up for what you believe in, even when it meant facing an intimidating figure like Karen. I realized that being part of a community is not solely about adhering to rules. It's also about fostering connections and embracing the uniqueness of each resident. I began to appreciate the many voices within our neighborhood. The stories shared by my neighbors during the community meeting echoed in my mind, illustrating how many felt trapped under Karen's strict regime. It dawned on me that my fight wasn't just for my right to display whimsical decorations. It was for all of us who longed for a sense of belonging without sacrificing our individuality. However, I also recognized the complexity of this battle. Each neighbor had their own experiences with Karen, and while some rallied behind me, others hesitated to take sides for fear of repercussions. The division within our community weighed heavily on my heart. I wanted to inspire change, but didn't want to alienate those who still found value in Karen's vision of order. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I began to understand that true community isn't about uniformity. It's about coexistence despite differences. It requires open dialogue and mutual respect among residents with varying perspectives. As I looked out at my yard, still adorned with colorful gnomes, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that this conflict was just one chapter in a larger story about our neighborhood. Moving forward, I was determined to advocate for a more inclusive environment where everyone could express themselves freely. This journey had taught me that sometimes standing up for oneself can lead to greater understanding and connection within community, ultimately enriching our lives together. I was ready to continue this fight, not just for me, but for everyone who yearned for a neighborhood that embraced both individuality and unity. As the days passed following the community meeting, it became clear that the conflict between HOA Karen and myself was far from over, but the dynamics had shifted. The tension in our neighborhood was palpable. Whispers of dissent against Karen's strict enforcement of rules grew louder, and residents began to feel emboldened to express their opinions. For the first time, I sensed a glimmer of hope that change might be on the horizon. Karen, however, was not one to back down easily. She continued to enforce her vision of order with renewed vigor, but now her actions were met with resistance. More neighbors started to approach me, sharing their own stories of frustration with her heavy-handed tactics. It turned out I wasn't alone in my fight. Many felt stifled under her watchful eye, but had been too afraid to speak out. This newfound solidarity fueled my determination even further. In response to the growing discontent, Karen organized another HOA meeting, this time to address the mounting concerns regarding her leadership style. As I prepared for the gathering, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. Would this be an opportunity for genuine dialogue and potential resolution, or would it escalate into another confrontation? At the meeting, residents voiced their frustrations openly, discussing how Karen's rigid interpretations of the rules had created an atmosphere of fear rather than community. To my surprise, many spoke in favor of revisiting the HOA guidelines, suggesting that they be updated to reflect our neighborhood's evolving character and values. The energy in the room shifted. For once, residents felt empowered to advocate for change rather than merely submit to authority. Karen listened but appeared increasingly defensive as the conversation progressed. It was evident she struggled to relinquish control over the narrative she had cultivated for so long. However, her grip on power seemed to weaken as more voices joined in support of a more inclusive approach to community living. Ultimately, we reached a tentative resolution. A committee was formed to review and revise the HOA guidelines collaboratively. While this did not mean an end to all conflicts or Karen's influence entirely, it represented a significant step toward fostering a more open and welcoming community. As I left that meeting, I felt a mix of relief and cautious optimism. The battle had not been won outright, but we had opened the door for dialogue and change. Our neighborhood was beginning to embrace a new identity, one that celebrated individuality, while nurturing a sense of belonging among all residents. I realize that while conflicts can be uncomfortable and challenging, they often serve as catalysts for growth and understanding within a community. And in this journey, I had discovered not only my own voice, but also a collective spirit among my neighbors that could reshape our home for the better. As I reflect on the tumultuous journey sparked by my encounter with HOA Karen, I find myself grappling with a range of emotions: relief, empowerment, and a newfound appreciation for complexities of community living. What began as a simple dispute over garden gnomes blossomed into a profound exploration of individuality, conformity, and the very essence of what it means to belong. One of the most significant lessons I learned is the importance of standing up for oneself. Initially, I worried that speaking out would put me at odds with my neighbors and disrupt the peace. Yet, my willingness to challenge Karen's authority not only sparked change, but also encouraged others to share their experiences. In doing so, we found common ground and began to foster a sense of unity that had been absent for far too long. I also realized that community isn't just about adhering to rules. It's about embracing diversity and allowing each resident to express themselves. The conversations that unfolded during the community meetings underscored how vital it is to create an environment where everyone feels heard and valued. Our neighborhood thrives when we celebrate our differences rather than suppress them under a rigid set of guidelines. Furthermore, this experience highlighted the delicate balance between structure and flexibility in community governance. While rules serve a purpose in maintaining property values and aesthetics, they should not come at the cost of individuality or personal expression. The establishment of a committee to review our HOA guidelines was a crucial step toward creating an inclusive framework that reflects our neighborhood's evolving identity. As I look around the familiar faces of my community now, I see not just neighbors but allies, people willing to engage in dialogue and work together toward positive change. The road ahead may still contain challenges, but we are no longer bound by fear or silence. Instead, we are empowered to advocate for a community that celebrates both order and freedom. In conclusion, my battle with HOA Karen taught me that conflict can be a catalyst for growth and understanding. It's often through our struggles that we discover our true strength and resilience. As we move forward, I am committed to fostering an atmosphere where individuality is cherished and where every resident can feel proud to call this neighborhood home. This journey has shown me that together, we can create a vibrant tapestry woven from